He's the top alpha successor in the pack, but he told me he doesn't want to be the alpha. Chapter 53. It's possible we sat in that position for an unmeasurable amount of time, with no windows or natural lighting to tell the time of day. There was no way to gauge just how long we were locked in one another's embrace. It could have been minutes. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. And we wouldn't have known a difference. For just those moments, everything stood still. But then those moments ended. Reality came crashing back down. New worries. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. And doubts laced my mind, and no matter how hard I pushed against them, they wouldn't leave me be. As time passed, my body grew tense. Samuel must have recognized the change because he soon sighed and released his hold on me. As soon as his arms were gone, my heart dropped further into my chest, and though Samuel was sitting right next to me, the room felt empty. Samuel rested his elbows on his knees and cradled his head. He titled it towards me, but I avoided eye contact. "Tell me what's on your mind," he mumbled. I folded my arms around myself, searching for some of the comforts I felt just moments ago. "It's never going to work." "How can you be so sure?" "Because I've tried running before, and I've failed." "That doesn't mean you will fail again." He nudged my shoulder. "Plus, this time, I won't be getting in your way." A small smile crept onto my face. I met Samuel's gaze and held it for a long moment before my face fell. "It's not just my life you're risking this time." To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. "I've got all to think about now." Samuel slowly nodded. "Two is better than one. You can help each other." "Maybe." I trailed off, but HE's just gotten over the shift. He can barely lift his head. That should get better soon. His body just has to catch up with everything. Samuel ruffled his hair. He did an incredible job with the shift. I haven't seen anyone come out on the other side like that before. My mind flashed back to the images of Will in the clearing. It didn't seem incredible. I didn't say it was pretty, just that he handled it well. And what about next time? The first is always the worst. I let out a short breath. Maybe, but I have no idea how to help him if it happens again. I paused, and my voice grew small. "Will it happen again? Yes." I bent my head, but Samuel quickly continued. "It's who he is now. Samantha, there's no fighting it. He doesn't have to have it be as large a part of his life as it is mine or anyone else in this pack. But it will always be there." He reached out his hand and placed it on my knee. It was so lightly placed that I barely felt the contact. "It will get better." To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. "I'll learn to live with it. Trust me." I wiped my eyes and ran my hand under my nose. "How do you know that?" "I won't be able to help him. If we're running away from wolves, there won't be any others to help him." To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I don't know the first thing about any of this. My hands fell to my sides. I took a deep breath and closed my eyes. Maybe we should just stay now. Samuel's hand grew tighter on my knee. "You both have to go. It's safer and you'll both be better off away from here." "How is that true? How can we get the help he needs? How will it ever work? Where would we even go?" Samuel withdrew his hand. He groaned under his breath and looked up at the ceiling. Both of his hands massaged the back of his neck, and he seemed to be searching the ceiling for answers. After a moment of hesitation, he mumbled his response. "I can help him if he stays." To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. If that's what you truly want, then I will make it work. But that's not the only option. I shook my head. What other options are there? He took a deep breath before settling his gaze on me. His hands still cradled his neck. You want to avoid the wolves? Well, yes, but I don't see how that's possible with Will now. I waited for an answer, but Samuel never gave me one. He searched my eyes instead. Conflict high on raging behind his own. His mouth hung open with every word he held back. How, I eventually whispered. He held my gaze for a moment longer. Then, his hands dropped, and he stood. Come with me. The next moments happened in a blur. I followed Samuel out of the room and back into my own. He left me there for a few moments, instructing me to wait for him to come back. Sure enough, a few minutes later, he walked through my bedroom door with my shoes and one of his jackets. He had already changed into warmer clothes and was wearing shoes as well. What's going on? He gave me my shoes and held on to the spare jet as I put them on. I need to show you something. There was little other conversation as I laced up my shoes and took Samuel's jacket. When I was sufficiently drowning in it, he took me by the hand and led me out of my room. Once more, the house was still as quiet as ever, and we saw no one as we trekked through the hallways. Samuel led us to the back door, where he hesitated. Don't leave my side. To my aching extraordinaire, webnovel. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Just for tonight. Where would I go? A ghost of a smile graced Samuel's lips. He opened his mouth to say something, shook his head, and dropped his gaze. He turned to the door and opened it, pulling me through the exit. The night was dark, though lighter than before. The sun was still nowhere in sight, but the moon was not as high in the sky. We both hopped into a truck, where Samuel put the car in drive without turning it on. He stood outside the driver's door and steered the car, pushing it until we were far enough away not to disturb the house with the sound of the engine. I tried to get out and help at one point, but after a sharp look from Samuel, I settled into the seat. When we were finally driving down the road, I curled and held my eyes from shutting. The hum of the engine lulled me into sleep and I was in no condition for a fight. Samuel urged me to shut my eyes for a few minutes, and to my surprise, I did. When I awoke, it was only a short time later. The sky hadn't changed, but our surroundings had. We were back in the middle of town, parked outside Samuel's apartment building. He didn't say anything as he jumped out of the car and came to open my door for me. I took his hand and didn't release it as we walked into the brick building. Even as we walked into the large building, Samuel kept quiet. He would shoot glances my way, but every time I would look at him, I'd flinch back. He never dropped my hand though, and for once, I didn't force him away, whether out of anxiety or a need for comfort. I didn't know. We walked through the corridors of the apartment building, hand in hand, without saying a word. My mind was racing with the possibilities of what Samuel wanted to show me, but I kept my curiosity inside. I could tell Samuel was deep in thought and fighting against himself. Whatever this was, he didn't want me to know. But for whatever reason, he decided to show me. We rounded the last corner and Samuel's red door came into view. His step faltered as we both stared at it. I tried to hold back my sudden smile at the wide-eyed expression Samuel adorned. What did you do to my door? A small laugh sounded from my lips, surprising us both. I hadn't realized until now. But Samuel hadn't been back to his apartment since the night Raven and I escaped to go after Will. Because of this, he hadn't seen the damage we'd done, a large splintering hole that was once a perfect door. It's just a small hole. Easy fix. Samuel shook his head, glancing down at me. Easy for you to say. You're not the one who has to fix it. And you are. He shot me a smirk. I'll just replace it. I never liked the red. To my agent extraordinaire, webnovel. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Before I could counter his remark, he pulled on my hand again. We both stepped over the pieces of wood littering the hallway, and once inside the apartment, we had to do the same. Samuel sighed under his breath at this. shaking his head when he thought I wasn't looking. The rest of the apartment was still the same. The kitchen on the right, my bedroom at the far end, the pristine living room to my left, and Samuel's room beyond that. It snooped around in there my first few days while trapped in this apartment, but I had never found anything to help me escape. Now I wished I looked harder. Samuel led me to the couch, where he sat me down and hesitated, glancing away.
Just sit here a minute.
I did as I was told, watching Samuel's figure retreat into his bedroom. He left the door open, and I could hear him grunting, pulling at things and throwing them around. Just as I was about to abandon the couch and help him, he re-emerged into the living room, holding a large cardboard box. My curiosity was practically burning. Now, all I wanted was for Samuel to rip open the box and dump the contents, so I could know exactly what it was that was so important to show me. However, like with everything else, Samuel had thought this through. He sat down next to me, placing the box next to his legs and out of my line of vision. The lid was closed, so there was no way I could glimpse inside. Just as I was leaning around him to try, Samuel placed a gentle hand on my chin and brought my gaze back to his. The look on his face stilled any further movement. His eyes were shining, with tears, apprehension, or some other emotion. I couldn't tell. Nonetheless, they had me enthralled. With one glance, there was nothing else in this room but him. Samuel kept my gaze, his lips barely moving with the words he spoke. I have to show you something, and I don't want you to be upset with me. Why would I be? I haven't been completely honest with you. He broke away, dropping his hand. I took a deep breath, gathering my thoughts. Do you think I'm going to be upset? He hesitated. I don't know. My hand was shaking, but I raised it to his face, pulling his gaze back to me. There's one way to find out. Samuel gave me a small smile, then turned to the box. I resisted the urge to look, letting him take control of the moment. There was a method to his madness, and maybe if I played along, it would make sense. He turned back to me, holding a picture frame. A reminiscent smile fell upon his features. He glanced up at me, back to the frame, then closed his eyes for a moment. Finally, he held it out. I took it with a careful grip. As soon as my hand grasped the black wood, dust caked my fingertips. I ignored it and instead turned the frame over to stare at the picture inside. It was a woman. She had her arms around 3 children, gathering them in until their shoulders were squashed together and cheeks touching. She was laughing, while the 3 children, 2 girls and a boy, were grimacing. The 4 of them were in front of a lake, standing huddled together close to the edge of the water. Despite the miserable expressions of the children, you could tell they were enjoying themselves. Their arms wrapped around each other and legs tangled until you couldn't distinguish which belonged to who. There was a light in their eyes, as well, one that screamed of youthfulness and carefree days. My grip tightened around the picture. I studied the features of each of the people in the photograph, my eyes narrowing as I did. There was no discounting. I was staring at a family. They all had dark hair and similar facial structures, though the girls had narrower eyes and jawlines. The boy was all too familiar. Even at a young age, I could distinguish the dark blue eyes, wide nose, and 2 sealed hair. My gaze shot up to Samuel. He was an older version of the boy in the picture, though countless things were different. His skin had lines that were becoming more and more permanent with added stress. His eyes were darker. He didn't have the innocent grin. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words would come out. However, Samuel knew what I was trying to say. That's my family. Chapter 50 for your family. My jaw gaped. Your family. Samuel grimaced, then tried to hide it with a smirk. That's what I said. I dropped my gaze back to the picture in my hand. But you always told me that. I trailed off, uncertain of my words, that the pack was my family. Samuel finished. I nodded, and he continued, staring at the picture with me. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilban, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm, The pack is my family. But this, I pointed to the woman. This has to be your mother. And these girls. I trailed off again, my finger lingering on their faces. My younger sisters. Twins. If you couldn't tell. I let out a breathy laugh. Twins. I stared at the two girls in the photo, mesmerized. They both wore their hair in pigtails. One of them was missing both of her front teeth, while the other was sticking her tongue at the camera. Samuel smiled. Oh, they look just like your mother. My thumb ran along her features. She had dark hair that was cut short just above her cheeks. Her chin was pointed, her nose small, but her eyes were wide. She had wrinkles lining her features, but they did nothing but add beauty to her stricken face. They took her name, two or at least, part of it. Bella. I looked up to see Samuel gazing down at the picture, lost in thought. Belle would always argue that she was the favorite because she had more of Mom's name. He laughed, but Mom would tell Ava that there was a V in Bella. You just couldn't tell because it was silent. I watched Samuel from the side of my eye. He was still staring at the picture, a far-off look escaping his eyes. Though a smile was plastered on his cheeks, there was another expression threatening to take over. Samuel abruptly laughed and looked at me. Those girls would argue about anything. A smile cracked my features, and for a moment, Samuel and I were lost in the two girls. Then, his face fell back to the frame, and I was reminded that we were only looking at a picture. Before I could ask any questions, Samuel was shaking his head and reaching into the box. Again, I look more like my dad. He told me. Another picture was placed on my lap. This one had Samuel a little older, though he was still just a boy. He was standing under the shoulder of another man. Samuel nearly reached his height, and the two almost looked as if they could be brothers. The older man had a thick beard lining his wide, set jaw and black hair that was slicked back. His eyes were sunken in, and as far as I could tell, their color was the only difference between the two. Where Samuel's eyes matched his mother, his father had bright, green ones. I glanced up to see another glint in Emil's eyes. This time, a liquid was pooling at the edges. Just as I was about to reach out to him, he turned back to the box. He dug around for a moment, and by the time he was facing me again, all liquid was gone from his eyes. Another picture was placed in my lap, on top of the previous two. This photograph held the entire family. They were sitting around a dinner table, mouths hanging open with laughter. The twins were still in high chairs, but Samuel sat on his father's lap. The family was staring at their mother, Bella. Her mouth was open and her eyes were wide. A pie of food was sliding down her face and onto her neck. Samuel's father, the clear culprit, had his head thrown back in laughter. Samuel was staring at him in awe. A wide smile filled my face. You all look so happy. I didn't have to look up to know that Samuel, for a moment, held the same expression. We were. A comfortable silence filled the room. I knew there was a but coming to Samuel's statement. If there was, he would still be with his family. However, I didn't push him. This was something he needed to get out on his own. Eventually, Samuel sighed. He took the frames from my lap and replaced them with a final picture. This one was bigger than the others, and the leather lining was worn down around the edges. This was the last picture taken of the five of us. They were older. Samuel was beginning to grow into himself, and the twins were past the frilly dress phase. Their parents had more wrinkles, and though you couldn't tell at first glance, their shoulders were sunken. They put on a happier fade. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noble, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. The five of them were in front of the same lake in the previous picture, though this time, wading in the water. My gaze left the picture and slowly traveled back up to Samuel. He was already staring at me. Why would this make me upset? He shook his head. This isn't everything. He fished once again into the cardboard box. This time, he put a pile of frameless pictures onto my lap. I flipped through them, growing more and more confused with each one. They were all pictures of wolves. Packs of them. Individuals. Light, dark, and in between. There was one wolf that was lingering in almost all of the pictures. To my agent extraordinaire, Love, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Brown and black creature, with shining green eyes. My father, Samuel explained. He was an alpha, the forest pack. Most people called them the greenies. To my agent extraordinaire, Love, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I flipped through the pictures a few more times, searching for a familiar wolf. However, I never found the blonde and caramel-colored fur I was looking for, nor did I see any red eyes. Samuel caught my search. You won't find me. My hands paused. Why not? He took a deep breath. I waited for him to continue. He folded his hands in his lap, shifting his weight and picking at his nails. His gaze would no longer meet mine. My heart throbbed. Samuel was unsure and uncomfortable. 2 words I never would have used to describe him. I almost didn't want to ask him to continue. But at the same time, I knew it needed to happen. Something he was holding back would fit all the pieces of the puzzle together. Samuel. My pleading voice was soft. He took a deep breath and closed his eyes, ignoring me. My brow furrowed. I reached out my hand to catch his own, if only to stop his nervous picking. When my skin touched him, his entire body stilled. His eyes fluttered open, and he stared at me. I'm not going to hate you. I'm sure I've hated you for much less than this, and I'm not going to do it again. My voice grew small. You don't deserve that. Hesitant relief overcame his features. He nodded a few times, took another breath, then opened his mouth. You won't find me in those pictures because I was a wolf. To my agent extraordinaire, Love, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I didn't get the gene. My sisters didn't. To my agent extraordinaire, Love, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. He paused and bowed his head. We were all human. My eyes went wide. My heart skipped several beats. Samuel stared at me, watching all this happen. His eyes flitted over my body several times, waiting for me to respond. A worry line appeared between his brow, and it only deepened with each passing minute of silence. He waited through it though, never pushing me to answer. Countless thoughts and emotions swarmed my mind. I couldn't hold on to any one of them. There was shock, disbelief. To my agent extraordinaire, Love, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Betrayal. And finally, confusion. How? I breathed, though it came out as more of a shriek. No one knows. He quickly interrupted, tensing his shoulders. At least, not very many people. Riley knew. He was the one who helped me with my first shift. Eden knew because she was with him. Marshall found out after my first shift. He was the one who made sure I didn't die from it. I think Goldie put the pieces together over the years. Apart from that, no one ever knew. We made sure of it. My mouth was dry. Things were falling into place. Comments, conversations, and side glances started making sense. Through it all, I could do nothing but stare at Samuel as he attempted to explain. Riley always wanted me to be his beta. He continued. So, he never let anyone know I was human. If they knew, I never would have been able to hold that position. The pack just assumed I didn't connect well with my wolf. I was still speechless. My entire world was shifting. Samuel kept staring at me, waiting for me to respond. But I couldn't even think, much less form a coherent sentence. Please say something, Samuel begged, oblivious to my inner struggle. Something between a laugh and cry escaped my lips. The noise was strangled, so I cleared my throat and spoke the next thought that ran through my mind. Why wouldn't you tell me? He took a breath and hung his head. I know I should have. I was just. He trailed off, leaving his mouth hanging open. The word was on the tip of his tongue, but only after he glanced at me did he dare say it. I was scared. I didn't want to give you another reason to hate me. I thought that if I told you, you would just think it was a plot for me to make you shift, or you would use it against me. If anyone knew about this. He trailed off, leaving the explanation to the imagination. I shook my head. Slowly. I would let use this against you. I know. He mumbled. I know that now. I started flipping through the pictures. This time, searching for another wolf. I had only seen Riley's wolf once before, but I doubted I would forget it. However, after a moment, I realized he wasn't in the pictures. To my agent extraordinaire, webnovel. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. That was my dad's pack, Samuel explained after catching my confused glance. Riley and his family were never a part of it. I took a deep breath, then put the pictures down and re-looked at Samuel. He was watching me with caution, expecting a blow-up at any moment. If our past conversations were any comparison, I should be screaming at him by now. But tonight, I couldn't find it in me. I wasn't angry, I was confused. What happened? Samuel bent his head. Again, his frame grew stiff, and he hid his face from my view. I was 12. He breathed. It was my family. The 5 of us. Against the world. Nothing could change that. We were a normal and happy family. Apart from Dad being a wolf. And all. He paused and didn't speak for a long time. When he opened his mouth again, his voice changed. It was no longer hesitant, but heavy and laden down with painful memories. It was around the time the wolves decided to come out to the world. Dad didn't approve of it. He couldn't understand why everyone wanted to do it. At that point, it was the consensus that it was what was best for them. I guess. Samuel shook his head. Dad spoke out against it. To my agent extraordinaire, webnovel. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. People listened. He tried to use his family, us, as an example of the harmony we could have with humans. There didn't have to be hatred. We could work. And his voice softened. We did work. He glanced up at me. When he saw I was listening, he let out a harsh breath and continued. People stopped listening. Other packs claimed Dad had gone soft. That's when the threats started. They were small at first, but they got bigger. They knew Dad was against it all, and without his support, he was the enemy. We tried to run. We took a few that still were loyal to my dad and disappeared. We made it as far as the northern border before they found us. Before we could get out and get help, we were cut off. There were too many of them. Warriors from 5 different packs came to stop us. I guess they thought that without his support, my dad would ruin their cause. We were all a threat. In the end, we didn't stand a chance. We fought. To my agent extraordinaire, webnovel. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. We fought long and hard. We almost thought we would win. Samuel's voice cracked, and he stared off into an unknown space. I slowly reached out my hand to touch his knee, unsure of what other comforts I could give. He relaxed at my touch, but his expression didn't follow suit. His eyes were hidden underneath his brow. His lips pulled into a permanent frown. Everything changed when Dad died. It took for men to pull him down. When people saw he was gone, their resolve was just gone with him. At that point, people started running. The other packs went after them. My mother told me to take my sisters and run. But we couldn't. We couldn't leave her. She tried hiding us. There were so many people. So much chaos. We all thought we could wait it out. Maybe, if we worked quiet, they would think we died. Samuel sighed and looked out the window. It didn't work. They found all of us. One of them snapped at my sister and I jumped in between. It got my leg. With the full moon being so close, the effects were almost instant, as if reliving the memory. Samuel rubbed the skin just beneath his knee. His face was contorted in pain. but his eyes were far away. When he spoke, his voice was almost a whisper. They were ready to kill us all. They were about to do it. But one of them saw that I was bitten. They tried to take me, but I wouldn't go without a fight. At that point, they were all too exhausted to put up with it. They lost people too. We used to be friends. Family. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilban, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. He took a shaky breath before continuing. I was able to convince them to leave everyone else alone, and they could take me. In the end, the humans weren't worth their energy. I had my father's blood running through me, and they knew if they could get me on their side, they would have an advantage at one point. Cal didn't have the father, so they took the son. Samuel scoffed, disgust forming on his features. Then, he caught my eye and softened. I went with them, back with Riley's father to Crimson Eye. The rest of my family left, and I haven't spoken to them since. He pressed his lips together until they were set in a thin line. He closed his eyes, dropped his head, and muttered, I don't even know if they're alive. Without thinking, my hand tightened around Samuel's. He was limp in my hold, but I didn't let that deter me. I sat with him for several moments in nothing more than a somber silence. The air was heavy in the room and it was almost hard to breathe. My thoughts raced with images of Samuel's family, torn apart by the very thing that sent my own family's life spiraling into hell. Samuel eventually opened his eyes and stared into my own. He blinked rapidly and pressed his lips together. Tears pooled in the corners of his eyes, but he held them at bay for as long as he could. When opened his mouth to say something, his words died off, and a mangled cry escaped. Without thinking, I pulled Samuel into me. He crumpled. Lifeless limbs fell on my own, and were it not for the couch bearing most of the burden, I would have fallen under his weight. Samuel leaned his head against my shoulder and stayed there until the jacket I was wearing was damp with tears. Even then, he didn't pull away. He simply mumbled incoherently into my shoulder. My hands wrapped around his neck and shoulder while my fingers played with the hair at the base of his neck. I'm so sorry, Samuel, I whispered. Not your fault. His broken voice rumbled in my shoulder. He pulled his head away for just a moment, looking into my eyes. When I saw his expression, the last of my heart shattered. He was broken. His entire being was broken. Everything Samuel had been holding in and shoving away made its way to the surface and exploded into his expression. His eyes were bloodshot. His mouth hung open. This time, though, there were no words to be said. There were only tears to finally be let free. I'm sorry, he mumbled, breaking away his gaze. He acted as if he was going to say more, but I cut him off. If you're going to apologize for crying, then just stop right there. I shook my head, my hand cold against the back of his neck. The pressure sent Samuel's eyes back to my own. After holding his stare for a moment, I gave him a sad smile. It's okay to miss them. It's okay to cry. Samuel tried speaking, but his words came out choked. I shook my head again and pulled him back into my shoulder, muffling his voice. He stopped trying to speak and went still. His shoulders rose and fell with heavy breaths. But apart from that, he was motionless. It seemed he would stay that way for an eternity. While sitting there on the couch, holding Samuel close to me, my world began to shift. For the first time since I could remember, I was not the one crying or needing comfort Samuel was. And it wasn't for some menial sorrow or hardship that he was breaking. It was because he had been too strong for too long. At that moment, everything changed. My view, my world, my life. Every resentment had been holding on to seemed insignificant. Each fight it had with Samuel was meaningless. He was a harsh monster that wanted to keep me locked away to cage his happiness. He didn't have some selfish or domineering motivation to keep me close to him. It was him that caused my life to go to hell, because the thing that did had ruined his life long before mine. Samuel was an enemy. He was a weak and vulnerable man who had lost everything. He was just trying not to lose anything else. Chapter 55 Unless I'm not alpha, thank you. Samuel spoke the words as I came back to sit on the couch. We had spent a sufficient amount of time crying in one another's arms, and after the worst of it had passed, we were left exhausted. I left to get water, hoping to revive us, if only a little. When I returned from the kitchen, Samuel was almost back to normal. He was sitting on the edge of the couch, leaning forward and bracing himself on his knees. His brow was furrowed, so deep that I almost couldn't see his eyes. Thoughts were racing across his face, but when I handed him his cup, they stilled. I sat down next to him. What are you thinking? Too much. Samuel shook his head, rubbing his bloodshot eyes. It's not that bad. You know. I attempted a smile to lighten the mood. Samuel raised an eyebrow. What's not that bad? Being human. You talk like it's a plague. Or something. It's really not that bad. Samuel looked at me for a long time. I held his gaze for as long as I could, but eventually, I broke away. When my eyes traveled back to my cup, I heard Samuel sigh next to me. I've been told differently. Just because you're told something doesn't mean that it's true. Samuel shifted so that he was facing me. I leaned further against the arm of the couch, just out of reach of him. Samuel regarded the distance for a minute before throwing an arm over the back cushions and sinking further into their comfort. He let out a long sigh before he responded. And from the moment I arrived here, it's been ingrained in my mind that wolves are better. Samantha, and do you really believe that? I bit my lip, suddenly unsure if I wanted to know the answer. My gaze flicked up to Samuel just in time to see the lines on his face crease deeper into the skin. I did. He nodded. Anger pricked at my heart. It was a sudden fire that sent sparks into my vision. Well, that's good to know, Samuel. I tried and failed miserably at keeping the venom from my voice. Apparently, nothing had changed. Despite his past, Samuel would still forever hold himself above me and what he used to be. Samuel's distracted gaze shot back to me. I avoided it, swirling the contents of my drinks in my cup. His hand crept toward me but halted halfway there. I said, did? Samantha. Not do. Things are more complicated. Now, he mumbled. I resisted the urge to roll my eyes. What's complicated about thinking you're better than someone? That you can't treat everyone like dirt and can control everything because you're a wolf. He shook his head and drooped his eyes. When everyone tells you something, over and over again, it's hard to distinguish what is real and what you're just being told. After a while, you start to believe their words and it becomes a part of who you are. He paused, trying to catch my gaze. My narrowed eyes snapped to him, and he flinched. Going against what you've always been told isn't easy, Samantha. It's changing the entire way you think. It doesn't happen overnight. I turned my head away and pursed my lips. The sudden fire of anger had just been doused, despite my best efforts to rekindle it. Samuel's words rang totally and completely true. There was no disputing him because I felt the same way. It seemed like so long ago I'd first met Samuel, and I had been terrified. Every interaction it had with the wolves only brought me pain and discomfort. Everything I'd ever heard about them was that they were ruthless, bloodthirsty creatures who were more monster than man. Then, Samuel proved to me that wasn't necessarily true. He was the first person to make me realize that not everything is as cut and dry as it's made out to be. I understood just how complicated it could be. After a few silent minutes, I let out a defeated breath. I think I understand what you're saying. Samuel gawked. You do. Don't give me that look. I snapped, incapable of changing my mind. Too, a slow smile crept onto his lips. I'm sorry. I was just expecting a different reaction. A fight and yelling. That, not this. I rolled my eyes and tried to keep the smile from my lips. Samuel looked relieved for his own good. Yeah, well, I decided it was worth it. I agree. Before I could say anything else, Samuel stood and gathered the pictures that littered the floor and coffee table. He placed each photo in its rightful place inside the cardboard box. arranging them so they wouldn't break. When everything was put away, he folded it shut and disappeared into his room. While he was gone, my thoughts wandered back to his revelation. It was still hard to believe what Hed told me. I tried to tell myself it didn't change anything. But, in all honesty, somehow, I felt more comfortable with Samuel, knowing that he used to be like me. I didn't know if it was right to feel that way, and I didn't know what all those feelings entailed. To my agent extraordinaire, webnovel, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I did recognize that where my thoughts of him used to be filled with hatred, now there was something more than tolerance. Samuel startled me by flopping back onto the couch and swinging his legs onto the coffee table. He laughed at my reaction, taking another swig of his water and looking at me. "What are you so deep in thought about?" Then smirked. "Me, I hope." I took a calming breath and rolled my eyes. "You sound too much like Wiley." He laughed. It was loud, full, and similar to a bark. I'd only heard that sound from Samuel a small number of times, so I cowled and keep a smile from leaking to my annoyance. "Well, Riley and I did grow up together." Samuel shrugged. "You know, we were close. Maybe a bit too close." He laughed again, and I beamed. Leave it to Samuel to turn a previously filled and bleak evening into one consumed with laughter. When his laughter died off, I shook my head, remembering my thoughts from earlier. "Can I ask you a question?" Samuel folded his hands behind his head, a smile still lingering on his expression. "You don't have to ask permission for anything, Samantha. I think we're past that. To my agent extraordinaire, webnovel, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm, habit." Then looked at me with raised eyebrows. "Why now?" I paused, gathering my thoughts. "Why share all of this information with me now? If you were just planning on letting me and will leave." Samuel sighed, the smile disappearing. "You need somewhere to go. You said you wanted away from the wolves. I thought my mother might be your best option." How could she help Will? To my agent extraordinaire, webnovel, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. "Isn't your mother human?" "She is." He groaned, taking his feet off the table and setting them on the floor. He leaned forward and ran a hand across the back of his neck. "She always helped the newly shifted wolves in my father's pack. Don't ask me how she did it. I don't know. All I remember is that she helped them. She can do the same for Will." He glanced at me. "If we can find her. If she's alive." Samuel's last sentence was spoken with such nonchalance that anyone else would have bought the uncaring tone. However, I had seen his mask too many times not to know when it was being put on. He was worried. There was no questioning it. He just didn't want me to know. "How are we going to find her?" Samuel leaned forward, cradling his head in his hands. "I've got some ideas. There's a few members of the old pack I remember from when I was a kid. If I cut them down, they might know something. Marshall has been looking into it all for a while. Now too, he has a few numbers from my old pack for me to call." He knew this was going to happen. Samuel gave me a side glance and a small smile. No. He just wanted me to get back in contact with my family. I always told him it was a waste of time, that I was never going to be able to go back. But I guess his stubbornness paid off. I laughed once. "I guess so." Samuel stood and pecked his drink from the table. He offered to take mine, and I gave it to him after downing the last of the water. He disappeared to the other end of the room where I heard the faucet running and the glass gots clinking together. I turned just as he shut off the water and leaned against the counter. "What are you going to do when we find them?" He looked up from the kitchen and back into the living room where I sat. Instead of coming back to the couch, though, he shrugged and began wiping down the cups. "Set up a place for you and Will to meet them." I bit my lip, fighting my next question. Like before, I wasn't sure if I wanted to know the answer, or to have my question imply something I didn't think I wanted. "Are you coming with us?" Samuel stilled, and I rushed out my next words. "To see your family. I mean, I won't be joining you. But don't you want to see them? I saw the visible tension seize control of Samuel's shoulders. I can't. It's not safe. I won't be able to disappear like you. If I leave, then it will endanger your chances of escape. My brow furrowed. Samuel, what's going to happen to you when we disappear? But the tension never left his body. The chiefs will come and decide my fate. I am first in line for the alpha position, so it shouldn't be a problem for them to let me take it. I sensed there was more than what he was telling me. But Samuel breathed deeply. If someone challenges my position, they will decide who is better fit. With the circumstances of Riley's death, they are going to be careful and meticulous about the whole thing. You think someone will challenge you? It was more of a statement than a question. Gray. Usually, Samuel refused to acknowledge the potential mutiny within his pack. Any time I brought up the possibility that everything that was going wrong could have something to do with the wolves, Samuel would refuse to speak on it. The pack is family, he would tell me, and that would finalize any conversation. But nothing ever added up, and my concerns were never resolved. These are the very reasons I was so surprised when Samuel actually answered my accusation. Yes, he said simply. Someone like Bray could challenge me. Samuel must have noticed my surprise because he quickly continued. It's not safe to speak badly of the pack in their presence. Samantha, if I entertain the thought of betrayal or weakness within ranks, people will latch onto it. They don't like uncertainty. They want to know we trust one another. As a pack should, even if that's clearly not the case. Samuel placed the cups down on the counter and meandered back into the living room, shoving his hands into his pockets. Yes, even if that's not the case, that's why we can't accuse Bray of anything. The accusation will only incite havoc within the pack. I pondered his words for a moment. Do you think Bray had something to do with everything that happened? My voice grew small. Tu es agent extraordinaire, Waylon Nilben. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. My mother. He was standing next to the couch now. Instead of sitting, he leaned against the back of it. I turned my body to face him. I don't know. I hope not. Furrowing his brow. James is still a candidate. What happened to your family is too personal for Bray to be involved in. Though his words held finality, I could sense the uncertainty lacing Samuel's tone. He waved one of his hands, though, continuing. You don't need to worry about that anymore. Anyways, you'll be gone and it'll fix everything. Unless you're not Alpha. He grimaced. Unless I'm not Alpha. Does the pack get a say in it? Surely, they like you more than Bray. I twisted my hands in my lap. He flashed me a grin. Tell me, what would they like more about me? Samuel. I deadpanned him. The pack may voice their opinions, but it is ultimately the chief's job to ensure the pack is run by a capable alpha. If not, they'll have more issues with the pack. Later. Then, they'd have to get the Grand Alpha involved in, to be honest. No one wants that. Confusion must have been evident on my face. Once more, before I could even question him, Samuel was explaining. I'm sorry. I forget you didn't grow up with all of this. He paused with his mouth hanging open in thought. There are 6 chiefs and 1 Grand Alpha. They make up the council. They're the ones who make the decisions for the entire werewolf population. Usually, the chiefs handle everything and the Grand Alpha only intervenes when the chiefs need help. Which is rare. So HES more of a figurehead. Not really. A chief's just never seen, and no one wants to see him. Enthusiasm, in the past, every time HES visited a pack, it was because they were conspiring against the council, though HES threatened to intervene for other reasons. As well, every time he shows up, packs are killed. That's the only way to ensure peace. I took a deep breath. Brutal. Samuel nodded. That's why it's best for the alpha transition to go smoothly. I bit my lip, thoughts swarming my mind. But, I mean, what would happen if Bray becomes alpha? What about Goldie? Didn't you say she was something? Couldn't she take the position? What about you being human? Does that change anything? He grinned. Goldie's the beta female, yes. But, unless she wants the position, which she doesn't, the chiefs won't consider her for alpha. His fingers tapped on the back of the couch as he answered my next questions. No one else knows what I used to be. As long as they don't find out, nothing will change. His words incited another thought. I looked up at Samuel for a moment, taking in his ragged state, creased brow, and bloodshot eyes. His arms were holding too much of his weight against the back of the couch, and his knuckles were white. He was beaten down and exhausted. Do you want it, Samuel? He looked at me, startled. Do you want to be the alpha? I repeated. His mouth was slightly agape, and his gaze wouldn't leave me. For a few moments, the truth was written plainly on his face. Then, he shook his head and took a deep breath, giving me a tight smile. You worry too much, Samantha. You'll be long gone before any of this happens. I opened my mouth to dispute, but as I did, Samuel's pocket beeped. He pulled out a phone and squinted his eyes, reading a small message printed on the screen. After a moment, his shoulders tensed. Again, we have to get back. What's going on? The phone slipped back into Samuel's pocket. Nothing's wrong. We just need to get back. I've got to speak with Marshall and have him start gathering the numbers to call. You should sleep. Samuel was already walking back across the room toward the front door. He paused, looking back at me. I held back a sigh and stood slowly so as not to disturb any healing injuries. Samuel looked like he wanted to help but ultimately thought better of it. When I came to stand beside him, we both hesitated at the door. I took a quick last look at the apartment and had the sudden feeling I wouldn't be coming back. The thought tugged at my heart in strange ways. Samuel watched me as my gaze scanned the rooms, then came back to him. He gestured toward the broken front door, and before I could stop myself, I took his hand in my own. Samuel gave me a sad smile before squeezing my fingers against his own and leading us out of the building. Chapter 56 Unconsumed Vegetable of a Brother. The journey to the house was uneventful, but the further we drove from Samuel's apartment, the more distant he became. The drive began with us holding hands and smiling at the sunrise, but by the time we arrived at the house, Samuel's hands were plastered to the steering wheel, and his mask was back on. The short walk to my bedroom was the same. Samuel dropped me off outside my door, mumbling something about needing to wake up Goldie. He left me standing in the doorway without another word. I stood in the hallway for several moments. My bed called to me. My head was spinning. Despite this, I turned away from the door and trudged down the corridor. I was exhausted and overwhelmed, but I knew I would be awake soon. He was always a morning person, no matter the circumstances. My only consolidation as I turned from sleep was that I could collapse onto Will's bed as soon as I made sure he was okay. He was likely going to be too tired to carry out a carry lengthy conversation. To my agent extraordinaire, Marianne Nilbe, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I was surprised to find Will's door unlocked. My surprise only halted me for a moment, though, before I inched it open and crept into the room. As soon as the door was locked behind me, I caught Will's eye. Hey, stranger. Will smiled at me from his position on the bed. He was sitting up and leaning against the large headboard. His blonde hair was sticking straight up as if HED run his hands through it many times, and there were dark circles under his eyes. Hey yourself. I walked over and sat in the chair next to the bed, crossing my legs and resting my chin in my hands. How do you sleep? Will looked me up and down. Better than you. I laughed once. That's probably true. What did you do last night? You should have slept. You never could pull an all-nighter. I raised one eyebrow. Why do you automatically assume I did something? He rolled his eyes and tilted his head while gesturing to my body. You're wearing the same clothes I saw you in last time. I lowered my gaze and half smiled at the floor. I could have slept in these. Okay. Sure. I believe that. He folded his arms and smirked. I don't appreciate the sarcasm. I never asked you to. Someone's in a good mood. I left. He shrugged and rolled his shoulders back. In feeling better. Got some good sleep. I narrowed my eyes. So those dark circles are just for decoration. To my agent extraordinaire, webnovel. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. What can I say? I'm allergic to dogs. We both burst into laughter. I couldn't keep the smile off my face as I looked Will over. Compared to before, he almost looked like a new person. He was wearing clean clothes. There wasn't any blood caking his skin, and his movements were smooth and light, though there were plenty bruises along each of his limbs and permanent shadows of exhaustion under his eyes. He was doing better. My gaze lingered on his for a moment, and I smiled wider. Your eyes are back. Will's hands shot up to cradle his face. I didn't know they left. I laughed again and pulled his hands back down to his lap. They're not red anymore. Genius. He looked at me for a moment, and I further studied his eyes. They were the familiar dark brown I'd always known. They brought back memories of late nights, comfort, and home. It had been too long since I'd seen them. Your Samuel told me they would change color a bit. I haven't been keeping track. I shook my head, smiling to myself. Well, you don't exactly have a mirror or anything to do that with. I folded my arms. And H.E. is not my Samuel. Sure, whatever you say. I rolled my eyes. So, how are you feeling? To my agent extraordinaire, webnovel. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Better. Will nodded, shifting his weight and pulling blankets around his waist. A bit. I mean, in getting used to it. Everything just hit me all at once and it was overwhelming. Now that I know what to expect, it's easier to deal with it. Plus, my body isn't being ripped to shreds, so that's nice. I can imagine. I cringe. Sleep is helping. The more time that passes, the better I feel. I bit my lip, and before I could utter a word, Will rolled his eyes, spit it out. Samantha, do you feel any differently? He pursed his lips and spoke after a moment. Yes. My head is constantly pounding. When I'm awake, I'm restless, no matter how exhausted I am. My face twisting. Wolf inside you. Will looked me once over, narrowing his eyes. Yes, and how do you feel? I trailed off, suspending my open hands in the air. How do I feel about that? Are you my therapist? Now? I folded my arms and huffed no. I'm just trying to gauge how you're doing. He sighed and shook his head. I'm not going to sit here and talk about feelings. That hasn't changed. I will tell you that it's weird and annoying and I hate every moment of it. But I'm adjusting. You don't need to worry about me. My face softened and my hands fell into my lap. I just want you to have someone to talk to. This is a lot. I can't even imagine. And I'm so sorry. To my agent extraordinaire, webnovel. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Really, truly. To my agent extraordinaire, webnovel. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. This should have never happened. No, it shouldn't have happened. But it's not your place to say sorry for it. I took a small breath. Do you know whose place it is? To my agent extraordinaire, webnovel. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Again, his frame went stiff and he turned to look at the wall. Are you going to tell me? He sighed and turned back to face me. James. My breath hitched in my throat. I stared at the space between me and Will, trying to absorb the information. I knew I was waiting for my response, but I couldn't bring myself to speak. You look surprised, he commented. I fought for the right words. I guess I am. Will scoffed. The sound brought me out of my trance, and when I looked back at him, his face was contorted in rage. I don't know why. He spat. I looked around the room and shook my head. I thought it was Riley, or Peyton Bray. Why would they bother biting me? It's a long story. I kept my gaze averted from Will and kept looking around the room. How do you know it was James? Will was quiet long enough for me to look back at him. He was already staring at me through slits for eyes and folded arms. I'm not sure. Come on. I huffed. I know you know. Or else you would have said it was James. Maybe. We stared at each other for several long moments, fighting to beat the other in stubbornness. I knew Will was holding back his information because I was telling him the entire story of Riley. In the end, I also knew he was much more headstrong than me. It is a long story, I reiterated. I'm tired. I'm sure you have a simple explanation. Mine could take hours. Will smirked. I'm waiting. I don't even know where to start. Running my fingers through my tangled heap of hair. I already told you about Riley. He expected certain things of me, and if they didn't happen there were consequences. Will cut in, holding up a hand. He threatened you with me, among other things. He threw his hands in the air, at everything he could hold over you. Why would you let it be your nearly dead and unconscious vegetable of a brother? Do you want an explanation? He grumbled, before gesturing for me to continue. To be honest, I'm not sure of Peyton's motivation. I've gathered that he wants to be alpha. That much is apparent. No matter if anyone will admit it, or not. I guess I just don't get a good feeling about the guy. Maybe he is trying to get to Samuel through me. Maybe he had some scheme and wanted you to join him. I don't know. I waved my hand to the side. It doesn't matter. Now, I know it was James. Will began to nod. You're right. That did take hours. I don't know if there's enough time for my side of the story. To my agent extraordinaire, webnovel. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I half cried, looking at him with desperate eyes. I've been waiting to hear who bit you for ages. Now this isn't a joke. He smiled at me, but it began to dim. Soon, he was staring at the wall again. I woke up when it happened. I sat up in my chair. You woke up. Enthusiasm, in the hospital. Just for a few seconds. He mumbled. The pain was enough to wake me up long enough to see James standing in the room. Did he say anything to you? No, did he do anything else? Not that I know of. I was out again before he left. Honestly, I thought he was there to finally kill me. My voice lowered to meet Will's. He wouldn't have killed you. It's how he kept Mom on his side. Will looked at me for a moment before shifting away. Again. The moment I caught his glance, I noticed his eyes change back to red. Have you spoken to anyone else since you came here? I quickly changed the subject. Just you, Samuel. And some woman who wouldn't actually speak to me. I haven't seen anyone but you in a while. To my agent extraordinaire, webnovel. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. To my agent extraordinaire, webnovel. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. He paused, shifting his weight and stretching his limbs. I was going to ask you about that. Is there any word on when I'm getting out of here? I was going to ask you Samuel or the blonde, but I haven't gotten a chance. I think I'm past the stage of out-of-control killing. Don't you? Well, I do have some sort of word on that. To my agent extraordinaire, webnovel. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. It's not exactly good word. To my agent extraordinaire, webnovel. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. And Will's hopeful eyes turned despondent. I gave him a sad smile before continuing. The bad news is that you've got to stay in here for 2 more days. Or something. It might be 1. Now, actually. I massaged my temples. I don't know what day it is. Anymore. Will stared at me without sympathy. You should get that figured out. Thanks. I did panting. You'll get on that. Is there good news? My hands went back to my lap and I nodded yes. When you get out. We're both leaving. We're getting out of here and going north. Will looked at me with wide eyes. North. Yes, away from the wolves. This town. Everything. There are some people we are going to meet who can help us. We'll be safer up north. There are less wolves. It's where I was heading before everything happened. His brow furrowed. Safer, he repeated. I took a breath. Deeper this time. To my agent extraordinaire, Love. Heartfelt thanks for your unfading patience, enthusiasm. Samuel has a plan, and if everything works out, then we'll be free from all of this. But the expression fell when I regarded Will's demeanor. He was breathing heavily, staring at me with red eyes. I can't just leave. It's not an option for me to run away from the wolves. I am one. Now there's no running from it. Before he was finished speaking, I was shaking my head. No, you don't understand. We're going somewhere where the people can help you. Somewhere away from the wolves. He interrupted. Yes, but no. Will shook his head and buried his fists in the blankets. No. The wolves are the only ones who can help me. Now no human is going to know what to do with me. These ones will. I reached forward to grab Will's arm. Listen. These humans are going to know all about this. They used to help people like you. He looked at me like I'd gone insane. I took another deep breath. I'm not crazy. To my agent extraordinaire, Love. Heartfelt thanks for your unfading patience, enthusiasm. Samuel told me about them. They used to be in his father's pack. They made it out before the wolves took over. Completely. They know what they're doing. Samuel told me they would help you. And you trust him. I recoiled. But my answer came quicker than I thought it would. Yes. I trust him completely. Then I trust your judgment. Will sighed, then shook his arm out of my grasp. What about Mom? We can't leave her. I sank further into myself. That won't be a problem. She's gone. Will was staring straight ahead. He was stiff and still, only taking small breaths when he needed to. I dropped my gaze, my voice growing small. How did you know? I read between the lines. I never could keep things from you. I don't know why you still try. I opened my mouth to respond, but the words died on my lips. Tears stung my eyes, but I blinked them away before they could fall. Look, I'm sorry I didn't tell you earlier. It's fine. I would have done the same thing. My hands folded together, twisting in on themselves. When I looked up, Will was staring at his own hands and picking at his nails. He was blinking rapidly, postponing the tears just as I was. We had both always been silent mourners. Though we went through hell together, we broke down on our own. There had only been a few rare times we shed tears together, and each of those times was unintentional. It seemed this might be one of those times. No matter how hard he tried, Will shed a few tears. His face reddened, but he didn't wipe away the moisture on his cheeks. I, on the other hand, was catching the tears almost as quickly as they fell. I'm sorry, I whispered after several moments of silence. I tried to keep her safe. He turned so he was facing me. The tears were still falling down his cheeks, and he did nothing to stop them. Don't ever say you're sorry. You didn't do this. It's not your fault. I went to interrupt him, but Will held up his hand and cut me off. I don't care what you say. Don't you dare believe it is. I looked at my feet. You don't even know what happened. I don't care. I know you. Instead of responding, I let out a shaky breath, phantom thought clouding my mind, reminding me of the words Peyton spoke to me. Will didn't know the entire story. He didn't know that it was a possibility my mother was targeted because of me. She could have been killed because of me and my failure to live up to Riley's expectations. A small voice spoke in the back of my mind, presenting the possibility that it was James who killed my mother. As quickly as the explanation came, I pushed it aside. In the end, it didn't matter who killed my mother. She was still dead and I was in the middle of it all. You need to sleep. Will broke the train of thoughts crashing through my mind. I shrugged and wiped another tear. I told you I was tired. You were using it as a cop-out. To my agent extraordinaire, Love. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Now it's legitimate. Gee, thanks. Despite my efforts to keep it even, my voice shook. We let out a small laugh. I'm kicking you out. Go to sleep. I'd let you stay here. But this twin mouse isn't shareable. Plus, your Samuel is probably looking for you. I shook my head and glared at him. If you call him my Samuel one more time, you can't hurt me now. Will interrupted and held his arms out wide. I'm an invincible werewolf. Baby. I stood and pulled a pillow out from behind him. His head clunked on the wooden headboard. And my laughter was immediate. Yes, very invincible. Tu es agent extraordinaire, Madeline Nilben. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. He rubbed the back of his head and grabbed the pillow. Just go to sleep. Gladly.